And by what we mean by that is that we feel it's really important that the stories of the people who lived through this are heard, acknowledged, and remembered. And to that end, I'm very happy that we have here today with us Marina Wheeler, who has written a family memoir about her mother's journey from Sargodha to Delhi at the time of partition, and a lot of other places after. So welcome, Marina. We're very grateful.
Hi, sorry, can you
hear you? Yeah.
Sorry, so as you were saying, Marina, what would a Zoom meeting be without a few tech challenges?
Absolutely, yeah. We would think we were cheated if we weren't being.
So I was just saying thank you so much for joining us here today, and we will be discussing your wonderful book, The Lost Homestead, My Mother, Partition, and the Punjab. So Marina, would love to just dive right in. In the book, I'd love to understand, like, your book covers a lot of themes that come out in partition stories: identity, belonging, home, love, loss. As you wrote this book, I mean, starting kind of with a big question, did this book change the way you think of your own identity, or change in any way, or did it change your idea of on any of these big themes on life, on belonging, loss?
Yes. Thank you so much, Malika. And you've dived straight in, and I promise to come straight back to your question, but I can't start without paying tribute to the museum, if I may, just briefly, because this is the Partition Museum launch, and it's such a wonderful thing. So I just wanted to say that at the outset, and say how happy I was, just very briefly, how I came to this. Was just meeting Kishwar Desai in London. I had started off on this project and was saying, I hear there's this partition museum. It would be so interesting to go there. I would be so interested to meet someone who's connected. And I think it was a function at the High Commissioner's. And the High Commissioner's wife said, well, as it happens, Kishwar Desai is here, and sort of swiveled me round to meet her. And of course, as your co-founder of the museum, she then got me going. So we'll come back, I think, to the museum, but the question of the book and the whole project of discovering my mother's partition story, yes, absolutely, it changed me. And I think the thing about our family was, I am, of course, half British, half Indian Punjabi, but I think the Indian Punjabi side of my heritage had been quite neglected for most of my life. That was a conscious decision by my mother, which she explained to my Indian relatives, my many Indian relatives, as being to save us from having a confused identity. So we never learnt any Indian languages. And I think that was something that I just accepted until a bit later in life. And once I started then, I suppose partly out of an interest in discovering a bit more about my own roots, but also on the anniversary of independence and partition, there was a lot of talk, a lot of commemorations and analysis on the television, radio, and sitting with my mother through that, it was obvious then that this was still something that played a significant role in her, I suppose, sort of inner life rather than outer life. And I wanted to know more about it. And as I hope comes out through the book, it really has been a journey of enormous discovery. Talking, I suppose, on one level, learning the history, which I didn't even really know, to my shame, but also learning more from my mother about what her family experienced. And of course, I underline here that they were lucky, much luckier than most. And just learning how the whole experience of suppressing the partition memory, the loss of home and homeland, what that's been like for her. And I think I discovered it's been much more significant than I ever really imagined. And going back to Pakistan was, yes, a huge experience.
Yes, I mean, one could see through the book that you were, as you were learning about your family history, you were, I think, as you said, understanding your mother in a lot of ways. And one thing, the theme we've seen through so many oral histories and so many families is this idea of silence. You know, that really that first generation, and you talk about it with your grandfather, as you refer to him, Papaji, he just said very clearly, we're not going to talk about what we lost. And so that silence comes down through the family, and from your relation to your mom either, she didn't really talk about that loss at all. Do you think what was her reaction to when you said you wanted to write this book? Was she apprehensive or ready after 70 years to kind of explore some of that?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think undoubtedly at first she was quite reticent, but I think the thing was that she expressed a willingness to talk about partition, in that, as I said, we'd been watching quite a lot in the media about independence and partition. And, you know, for example, there was one moment when we were watching an account which covered the 1946 disturbances in Calcutta. And that was after Jinnah had declared, you know, the cabinet mission plan had collapsed, and there were these terrible massacres in Calcutta. And she suddenly said, my God, I'd completely forgotten I was in the city at that time. I mean, she was only 15, she was staying with her sister, she was nowhere near the violence itself, but you know, she hadn't thought about that for so long. So I think that part of trying to retrieve her memories, I think a part of her did want to do that. But the book actually talks about both that journey, I suppose, of India finding its independence, shaking off colonial rule, the trauma of partition. But the book also does deal with more of her own personal journey after partition.
Yes.
And she called herself twice displaced. So the first displacement was partition, from leaving Sargodha. But then the second was leaving India. And that followed an unsuccessful, difficult arranged marriage before she married my English father. And I think that painful part of her life as well, she'd also suppressed. And she was definitely not, I think, expecting to talk about that particularly. But as we went through the project and we did talk, I think she just became used to reliving both the good memories and the painful ones. So if you, as you know from reading the book, yes, you know, she's not a let's sort of, you know, throw it all off and tell all. She's not a sort of Oprah Winfrey contestant, but, you know, but she did open up, and I think ultimately that was quite cathartic for her.
And in the book, you have some lovely memories that she has of Sargodha itself. So can you share with kind of the people listening some of those memories? They're very evocative of her childhood, of this lost homestead.
Yes, I mean, I don't know if you want me to read a small section, or I mean, shall I do that?
Yeah, either way.
Okay, I'll read. I mean, I hope it's not too long. It's just the very early part in the book. The book starts with me arriving in Lahore, but then I sort of flash back in a sense. So I'll just read, if that's okay, this this short section. This is based in her house. She lived in what she always called it paradise. which was an extraordinary house in Sargodha on the canal. So I'm just going to read one little snippet from there. As the sun rises and the birdsong becomes insistent, Deep tips herself out of bed and crosses the inner courtyard to join her father. Papaji never missed his morning walk. At the edge of the gravel path, they slip off their chappals and lay them side by side. Stepping onto the lawn, she feels the cold dew between her toes. Papaji takes her hand. For Deep, the youngest of 5, it's a special time. A busy father whom she worships is all her own. Papaji loved to grow things. Near the house, flower beds the size of a tennis court were packed with narcissi, their white and orange blooms giving off a rich and honeyed scent. Mulberry bushes 6 foot high heaved with fruit. When the berries fell, everything around was stained deep red. At the far end of the lawn, they follow the path towards the vineyard. I loved the grapes, Deep tells me. The Mali used to fertilize the plants with goat's blood. You mean powdered blood, like we use? I ask. No, proper blood from the animal, thick crimson red. Further on, they come to the orchard. Papaji circles the trees and points out proudly the good-sized fruits, the Malta oranges and grapefruit, which some said were the prize of the district. Returning to the house, they pause to pluck branches of jasmine, delighted by the sweet, gentle aroma. From a distance, as they approach, they see the household waking. The kitchen, largely the preserve of servants, opens onto a gravel pathway where local labourers stop on their way to work. 8 or 9 have gathered. They hold out their earthenware tumblers, which a servant fills with buttermilk. Another hands out chapatis. I mean, that's just a short passage of the surroundings.
No, it's lovely. You can imagine it fully, and I think you've described it so beautifully. That sense of paradise that your mom felt she had over there. In terms of even a relationship with a father that maybe over the years was changed. So all that nostalgia, I think, is in there.
But that's, I mean, interesting point was the things that she did remember. And I mean, well, on partly, it was fascinating. So she so naturally wanted to talk about that part of her memory. And she remembered small details like, flicking clover into the canal. But the details of leaving Sargodha, when things got traumatic, and even being reunited with the family was so, I think, deeply suppressed that she didn't really recall those anymore. And I found that very interesting, how selective that memory process was.
Yes, definitely. I think, as you say in the book, it's also the memories we go back to and the memories we allow ourselves to dwell in. Those are the ones that have stayed. But your grandfather's idea of silence on the loss was so strong that those were memories that I guess she just put away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. She didn't. Sorry, go on.
No. I was about to say, but this idea of home is also very powerful. And we see that in a lot of the oral histories that we've done for the museum, there is this yearning for the home that has been left behind and a nostalgia for it. And you actually went back. You went on this epic kind of detective mission to try find that home. So really 2 things around that. One, wanted to know, had anyone else in your family before that, in the extended kind of family, gone back to Sargodha ever? And if not, was there ever any conversation about why not? Because you had some aunts who did go back to Pakistan. I was reading for an alumni event at Kinnaird. So did anyone make it back? And then your mom even didn't come to India much after they were abroad. So just on that idea of home and what you think it meant for your mother and your broader family. And then after that, I'd love to come to your kind of detective mission. But first on, the idea.
Yes, I think absolutely you're right. This sense of home and longing was very, very strong. And I think very few of our family did manage to go back to Pakistan. I mean, my grandparents, Papaji and Baiji, tried to go, I think it was in the 50s, and they weren't allowed at that time to Sargodha, but they were allowed just to visit a Gurdwara, which they did. And because they couldn't get back to their hometown, where they had had very good relations with the Muslim, the gentry, as they seemed to call them in those days, those friends who had urged them to leave temporarily when things got difficult came to see them. And I think on that occasion brought my grandfather some of his things. I mean, the very few treasures that we have, a photograph and some medals that he'd been awarded. But that was their only trip back, so to speak. And then one of my, quite distant relatives had been back, and we had lost touch with them. And during this, so you call it detective work, I spoke to them and found them, and they, wonderful old lady called Goody, drew me a map to try and help me to find where we had lived. She had been back because she'd been to Kinnaird in the 90s. So that was still quite hard. She was drawing a map for me from a memory of a trip she had done over 10 years earlier. And yes, Lahore, I think one of my cousin's mothers, who sadly passed away, had been to a Kinnaird College reunion in Lahore, but had never made it to Sargodha.
And what was your experience going back? I mean, when you went, what were your emotions being there?
Well, it was an extraordinary thing. I mean, my mother was initially, I suppose, amazed that I wanted to go back, and I think apprehensive, of course. She said, "Why would you want to do that?" when I suggested it, and I think for a lot of reasons. And obviously, for her it was a place that she felt in a way she'd shut the door on, but I absolutely felt that it was necessary for me to go, even if I wasn't going to find the house, because I understood, so much had changed. But I don't think I appreciated quite how much had changed. But it was an extraordinary journey. And I don't know if one of the participants on this Zoom is a young academic from the University of Sargodha, who I mention in the book because he was extremely important and influential and helped me to look for my mother's old house and really try to help rediscover a bit of colonial Sargodha, because it is changed beyond all recognition, but there are signs. So I certainly found that with his help, Abra, hello if you are out there, I was able to get a sense of, some of the fixed points. And it was interesting to discover, even, for example, that the university, which didn't exist at the time when my mother was there, I understood had become, during the partition, a camp, a refugee camp in a sense. Those Sikhs and Hindus who were leaving the district were there for a period of time before they got transport out to India. So, but what was striking to me, I think most of all, and I'm talking a bit about the history and then I'll come back to the personal, was how invisible the history was. I mean, I think, there's no partition museum on that side of the border. Sargodha, it was very hard to marry this place up with the place that my mother had described. And then I think for the emotion, it was a strong sense of here we were in a place that I knew had been a rich and diverse town, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, living side by side. And that, of course, had ended. And my family had gone with hundreds and thousands of others, leaving ostensibly no trace. And of course, the same thing has happened, mirror image of all of the families that were forced to leave the Indian side at partition. But I suppose one difference is that you have managed to set up a partition museum in Amritsar, so that there is some memory there from all of the the people who have been affected that has been stored, and that of course is a great tribute.
Thank you. Yes. I think that one thing I found very interesting in the book, though, was that when you did find what you thought was the location of your family home, you chose not to share the photograph with your mother. Why was that?
Well, I mean, what I found was the place where the home was. Yes. But I mean, I don't think it's a great plot spoiler to say that, the home was no longer there. Yeah. But, I mean, it was a run of commercial buildings. And I think I just felt that it was obvious, having spoken to her, and from, say, the passage that I read out, that in her mind she had such a strong sense of this beautiful place that she had grown up with, marble floors. And I'm sure to some extent she had idealized it, as we all do, and it just felt to me it would be too big a dose of reality to say, well, actually this is now where your house was. It felt to me that it was unnecessary. It was, I mean, in some ways, and this is the thing that I discovered, is that part of it, I think, going back to Sagoda, was probably more valuable to me than it was to her, in the sense that I think she had probably closed the door. She was, sadly, she passed away earlier this year. So it really was towards the very end of her life. And I think to some degree, she had created she'd managed, she had a modus vivendi, whereas I still had lots of unanswered questions.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry, firstly, for your loss. That must have been really hard. But you did, I guess you did manage to have this wonderful experience of reliving a lot of her memories in the recent years. And she did see the manuscripts of the book.
Yes, yes.
So it's a wonderful way to remember her, and for her to know that you were working on this with her. I think it was probably a wonderful project to take on. Do you have any advice for other people on the call who might want to do a similar exercise? We're always hoping people will record their family stories.
Absolutely. I mean, and of course, the Partition Museum, a lot of that is oral history, isn't it? And it's so rich. And wonderful, and certainly I found a lot of it deeply, deeply moving. But yes, I think I would say to people, and maybe particularly these strange times where, we're all, I mean, to some degree against our will, locked away to protect each other, but it's difficult. Not everyone is locked away with their families, but I do think that so many people have said to me since I've done this, and since the book has been published, whatever it is, a month ago, I so wish I had done that. I so wish I'd taken the time, because so many of our parents or other relatives we know have stories, but life is just so busy. So I think, of course, if you can find the time, do it. But I think also there are different ways. I mean, lots of people, probably the optimum way might be to film a relative. But I knew with my mother that was absolutely not going to work, because, I had to be a little bit more surreptitious with this. So we would just have chats here and there, and I had to keep it quite low key. So, everyone is different, and there may be people there as well whose relatives don't want to have a camera pointed at them, but to find different ways maybe of just drawing out some of the past before it's lost.
Yes, definitely. On that note, I'm going to make a quick plug that anybody on this call who has a partition family story, please do be in touch with us at the museum. We would love to record it and help you preserve it. And our team can help you do that via Zoom. even these days. Marina, I want to shift gears. I mean, you've mentioned in the book that you've been to the museum, and I was quite happily surprised to hear that you went 4 times.
Yes.
I was intrigued by that. Did you go back to different parts of it?
Well, I mean, as you know, there is a lot in it. I mean, it's wonderful. It really is. And I said so at the beginning, and I repeat it. I think it is a huge tribute, because I know from Kishwar that you faced obstacles. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a sensitive subject. And even, I guess, also just money, because, you know, finding money to devote to that kind of a project can't be very easy. And I think you did a fantastic job of informing, as well as, I guess, providing a repository for people's memories, so helping to heal. But I mean, I went 4 times because I did think I needed that to really digest a lot of the material, because you have got quite a lot of, I mean, for example, the historical story you're telling in a very detailed way. And you have newspaper front pages from a wide range of the newspapers from the time. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, Dawn newspaper, for example, as well. So you really do, and I admired this, try to give a perspective from, and I imagine that, you know, Dawn was a voice of the Muslim League in the era when you were using the headlines and so on. And so you do paint all of that picture very well, but it's complicated, isn't it? I mean, and I think that's my whole interest and enthusiasm on this topic, is before starting this out, I knew only the barest details. I mean, that's wrong to say, the barest outline, for example, of Cyril Radcliffe, of coming and just drawing a line, was my perception of what happened. But of course, it's more complicated than that. But the history, as time goes by, we lose all of the nuances. And I think that the museum does a fantastic job of that, but one does need time. So I took 2 trips to Amritsar in 2018 and 2019. And then on each of those trips, I spent, I would go one day to the museum and come back again the next day. So I had time to digest. So that's how it got up to 4. But I think also, and in the book, I refer to one of the stories that I got, because of course you use video, you use audio stories, and there's a lot of human stories as well that are very moving, I found.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your kind words. When I was reading the book, I felt just so warm, even hearing about you refer to some of what we have in the museum. I would love to, you know, as I said, shift gears a little to talk about one of the other themes you have in the book is on colonialism, and this, of course, has been a big topic in India recently. Is how one remembers the empire, both in Britain and in India. I would love to hear from you, talk about this experience where your mom goes to see the Kohinoor and says, "This is ours, we stole it." But even more broadly than that, you know, do you think that in Britain today, the youth have an understanding of the full reality of the empire, and how do they view it, and what do you think is done well, not well? What would you do differently?
Well, that's a big question, and I think I'm likely to spend with many of my compatriots the next year discussing this. But I absolutely think, no, I don't think young people here, or for that matter, I think in India or probably Pakistan, you know, have an understanding of the full picture of empire. I mean, I think just dealing first with here, I know some people think it's celebrated in Britain. I don't think that's right. I think the way that the establishment and the education establishment has dealt with it is just to avoid it. It's too sensitive a subject. And I think that's why it's not taught in schools, really. You know, we have a lot about the Tudors, who of course were, you know, extremely interesting, with Henry VIII and so on. And we even learn about the revolutions in China and Russia and so on. But empire is too sensitive. And I think we absolutely do have to brace ourselves now, 70 years on. I think that we've got to talk in a, you know, a level-headed way about all of these things. I mean, we're talking about India, so I'll confine my remarks to that. But of course, you know, the British Empire extended more broadly than that. And in fact, I'll just say one word and say why I think, in fact, ignorance of empire is so dangerous. We had an example of this recently in something I don't know if you know, it's referred to here as the Windrush Scandal. But in essence, it was a scandal, an immigration scandal, where the authorities were immigrants, these who came in the 50s and 60s, that because they had no evidence of their entitlement to be here, they should go back to the West Indies. And this was a scandal because they had come at a time when they didn't need documentation. They were citizens of, you know, the former empire. But this had been forgotten. I mean, and this is just one example of a sort of, you know, a loss of or an absence of understanding of your history can lead to, you know, serious injustices, and that was one. But I think that we began talking at the 70th anniversary of Indian independence and partition, as I've referred to. There was a certain amount of coverage in the media here, but I think it left a lot to be desired. And I think a lot of it was very polarized. So just giving you one example of a program about Jallianwala Bagh. So what the program makers would do is they would find relatives of those who had died in Jallianwala Bagh and spoke to them. And then on, say, the English side, so to speak, they found relatives of Colonel Dyer. And to my mind, this was really, I was quite angry about that, because I thought this gives the impression that the relatives of Colonel Dyer, who have, you know, of course they're going to, because it's their relative, try and put as benign a gloss on this horrendous event as possible. But that doesn't represent the thinking of the British people. So I would like there just to be, as much as we can, you know, let's agree on what the facts are and then have a very civilized, sober debate about the lessons that you can learn and the interpretation. So I think for schools, we should start to try and do that here. But I think in India and Pakistan, you know, school children there would also benefit from some effort to look as well and try and understand what the other side sees of the event of partition.
Thank you, Marina. I think that's a big note on which I think I will end our part of the discussion. I do want to leave time open for conversations with the number of people we have listening in. So we're going to open the question answers now. If you could write your questions in the chat box, and I will pose them to Marina as they come in. While that's happening, Marina, I want to say that for all the Delhi walas in the audience, there was this one hilarious passage in the book about how golf links used to be like a jackal infested forest when your mom moved in, and she danced in Humayun's tomb, and so all these kind of lovely memories of a Delhi gone by.
Yes, I was amazed to learn that from one of my cousins. I mean, to me, it's just, you know, this incredibly well-tended place where I can't imagine that sort of degree of wild. But yes, it wasn't so long ago.
So everyone listening, we're waiting for any questions you might have. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. It's as we've been discussing, has some lovely memories of um, the Marina's mom's journey, not only pre-partition but also India, and then later, Marina, how your mom was really an incredible woman for her generation. I mean, the things she did, like reading the book. There's one other theme actually that was quite interesting for me, is because it's again something we've heard from a number of women. Is, we all know obviously partition was horrendous if you were a woman, in the sense that there was a lot of rape, abduction, violence, honor killings. But for the women who on both sides did make it across, one thing we've heard is this idea of sometimes it led to newfound freedoms. So there were people who used to be in parda before, who now, because of economic realities or lack of privacy, suddenly found that they were out a lot more in the open. And I think you allude to the fact that maybe for your mother also, that moving from Sargodha to India maybe changed her life in a lot of ways.
Yes, I mean, I think there are two things there, and I'm not going to claim to be a great expert, not least because it may be that one of my cousins, Geeta, who is a great expert on this, might be listening in. But my understanding is that, I mean, in a way, the independence movement, more than partition, acted as a way of getting a lot of women out of the home and into the public space. So, that the mass participation movement meant that, much like I think in the UK in the Second World War, well, to some degree in the First, women had to leave the home to do jobs that men did. Here, I think in the independence movement, women also participated and protested. So as I understand it, that was a big spur to women occupying more of the public space. And of course, that in the book I mention quite a few of the extraordinary women, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, etc., who stayed in the public space. But then I think also, as I understand it, partition and the trauma of partition, and the fact that women suffered abduction, sexual violence, horrendous on both sides. They suffered horrendously, meant that there may well have been a closing down again after. So the protective cloak coming back in afterwards. But I think for my mother, yes, in some ways, and I comment on this in the book, it was a strange thing that this, horrendous event, one of the most shocking of the 20th century, for her in a strange way, did open up her world and her life. But having said that, there were all sorts of other factors that led to that, in that, as I alluded to before, she did have an arranged marriage, partly because they had lost everything at partition. And so she joined a family that was well off and could give her that shelter and protection that she left. So yes, her life, like many others, I think, took a winding path. Ultimately, I think a rich and fulfilling one.
Yes. No, I found her journey very impressive, how she's learning Russian and German and working with Amnesty. Well, we've got a number of questions come in. So Punita Singh says, my ancestors are also from Sargodha and also practiced this collective suppression of emotion about what they'd left behind. Pragmatism and stoicism defined them. I'm wondering if it was similar on the Pakistani side. What did you find?
I mean, one of the things I was very struck by in traveling to Pakistan, and I think what makes it an event, well, there were two trips that I will, treasure, and that I think very much now define how I see the world, is that I, of course, found that there was a mirror image of suffering and hurt. And I was only there for a short time. I hope to go back, but I'll just give you one snippet, which was when I was giving a talk at the University of Sargodha. After the talk, I was sitting with Abrar and some of his academic colleagues, and I had talked in my short discussion to the history students of his about my grandfather being given land in compensation for what he'd lost in Hoshiarpur. And I was talking about how, you know, he never really came to terms with what he'd lost, but he used to love to go to these lands in Hoshiarpur, and he started to grow mangoes and other fruit as he had done in Sargodha, but was never able to in Delhi. Anyway, I was talking about this, and then after the talk, the academic said, oh yes, my parents, they always talk about Hoshiarpur, where they came from. And the Muslim community in Hoshiarpur had suffered appallingly, his parents among them. And the way he spoke about that, about how his parents, you know, tears come to their eyes when they recount their experience, was just one of many instances where I could see, as I say, how this was a common suffering to two people who are now divided so firmly by not just the border at Wagah and Atari, but by increasingly hostile statements and sentiments in the political sphere. So yes, I found that very, very striking.
So Marina, actually one of the comments now is from Abrar, who helped you write the book. So Dr. Muhammad Abrar Zahoor says, Dear Marina, good evening from Sargodha. Congrats a lot once again on getting your work published. You did a great job of discovering the roots of your maternal family. I'm proud of being part of and doing my humble contribution in your journey in Sargodha. You're always welcome to visit whenever you would like.
Thank you.
So the next question actually is from Bridge Bajaj, who is wondering, how was the fact that you do have this mixed heritage, maybe you're seen more as a foreigner than, let's say, an Indian or a South Asian or even a local. How do you think that affected your research and field work in Pakistan while you were trying to uncover your family heritage there?
I mean, it's interesting, this reference to foreigner, because as you're asking me the question, I'm thinking, are we talking about me being a foreigner in the UK or in India or in Pakistan? Because in a sense, I mean, I feel slightly foreign in all places, although not quite as foreign in the UK. But I mean, I certainly found, I mean, in Pakistan, you know, I was, I think people were intrigued that I was undertaking this, you know, this journey and this quest, and they helped me in all sorts of ways. I mean, Abrar has kindly popped up, and I mean, really, he did an enormous amount. But there were others too, who I mentioned in the book, Ajaz, Najum, people who, well, without whom I wouldn't have been able to, I think, sort of penetrate enough Pakistani society. They found people who could talk to me. They showed me places. And I think maybe it was easier for me than it would have been for my Indian cousins, perhaps, to go. And certainly the original idea had been to go with 3 of my Indian male cousins. But there were some anxieties around that, I think. Because the reality is that one hears, I think in India nowadays, such hostile, you know, talk about Pakistan that no one really knew what sort of reception they would receive as turbaned Sikhs arriving in Sargodha. So I think it's unfortunate that that is the case. And I think it was much easier for me coming from London to be able to undertake this journey, undoubtedly.
Well, certainly you had, from the book, it seems like a very warm welcome and just a lot of people helping you on this journey. And, as I said earlier, it was quite fun even to read about this detective undertaking with this 10-year-old map and, trying to really find a thing in a landscape that had really changed quite completely since your relatives had gone. A couple of questions from people asking for your opinion on the link between oral history and broader history, and maybe even as we were saying earlier, as people think about recording and memorializing their own family stories. What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, as we were saying before, I mean, the process of giving or taking an oral history, I think probably performs different functions. I mean, one, it's an invaluable source for a broad historical understanding. And I think this is, this to be, and Abra, among others, as an academic in the history field, will know that certainly when I was a youngster, we learnt much more just the history of what the decision makers, those on the top, would do. And of course, I go into that in the book, that the Gandhis and the Nehrus and the Jinnahs and Mountbatten and so on. But it's vastly enriched in understanding what was the impact of these leaders' decisions on ordinary people. And I think that's what, Urvashi Butalia is one of those who went out and started to take these oral histories, and you're continuing. So I think filling in the historical picture in that way is a vital function. But I think also for the people themselves, and we were talking about how my mother felt about speaking about her past, I think it also performs a very valuable function in helping them to come to terms with, what may have been very traumatic events, as partition certainly was for those in the Punjab, and elsewhere, of course.
No, absolutely. I think, Marina, I would echo, what you were saying. And certainly, as we think about the museum, that was really our thinking, is that the stories of what happened at a macro level have been told and retold and analyzed, and perhaps will need to be analyzed even more. But the history, with which we should say history with a small h, which is the stories of experiences of really what happened with millions of people, those really have not had a chance to be heard. And it's definitely one of the things we do try and do at the museum also. A couple of comments, one from Rosina Ahmed and one from Balbir Singh Khattar, who both talk about the fact that it is really important. They feel that the British education system should touch on colonial history. Rosina says, thank you for sharing your personal journey. It has inspired me to learn more about my heritage and family history. It is important to learn about colonialism, which we didn't in school. As a British Asian growing up in the UK, history lessons were more about Henry VIII and Queen Victoria, which was great. However, there was very little education on partition or any other kind of history. Most of my friends have tried exploring and learning about our history through archives. It is paramount that schools in Britain implement colonialism as part of the curriculum. This encourages more understanding, knowledge, and a lack of ignorance in society.
Can I just comment? Because I think that's absolutely true. And I just want to mention one episode that I do refer to in the book, which was on the anniversary, the centenary of the end of the First World War. So this was 2018. I went to an event at the LSE called Cardi Poppy. And the purpose of that event was to try and commemorate and thank those troops from around the Commonwealth. And of course, troops from the Punjab were absolutely instrumental in the success in winning both First and Second World Wars. When I say winning the war, I mean standing up for freedom and democracy. But what was so striking in that event was the sense from British Asians as that comment indicated, that they had felt excluded previously from commemorations of the war and the thanks that was given at the time of the war. But it was underlining that this was a common history. And as the diaspora, I mean, the Indian diaspora here in the UK, I think is something like 1.5 million. When I say Indian, I mean from the Indian subcontinent, which is huge. And I personally think that part of the purpose of looking at colonial history is to try and let those youngsters understand too that there is a shared heritage. Of course, there were atrocities, like we've discussed Jallianwala Bagh, which have to be acknowledged. But I think it is important for them understanding their role and their position, that, you know, British society today owes their forefathers a great debt of thanks as well. So I would like to see, you know, some kind of emphasis as well on our shared history.
Great. Thank you, Marina. I think definitely, you know, the histories of India, Pakistan, Britain, the entire, it's so much of the empire are so interconnected. And as you say, that history could be made much more broad. That's certainly one of the things we're trying to do at the Partition Museum. We are going to have to wrap up soon. Ejaz from Lahore says, please, you're most welcome to return anytime. And so thank you so much, Marina, for making the time today to talk with all of us about your wonderful book. It is very evocative and moving, and it was a really interesting read. So thank you so much. And I would, again, anyone here on this call who has not visited the museum, please do, when the pandemic ends, do try and come visit us. In the meantime, we would love to include your family story in our archives. If you have any objects, photographs, letters, please do think about sharing them with the museum. We can help you archive and document your family's history for the future so that it can be remembered. That's really what the museum is for. And we would love to record your parents, grandparents, relatives, friends. We're doing it on Zoom these days just for everyone's safety. So please do reach out to us if there's an oral history that we can record. With that, thank you again, Marina. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much. And can I just say what a privilege it is to be able to address your audience in India, in the UK, and also to speak to friends in Lahore as well. And I'm so grateful for the chance to do that. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great week. And
you too.
Wish everyone the best in these difficult times. Bye.
Bye.